Welcome, geeks. Welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm glad you're back. We had a couple of weeks off. I think it was 3. So I'm glad we're back. I'm glad I get to listen to my song. I was just watching that video, and there's a picture at the very end of me surrounded by a bunch of C-sharp corner people in blue shirts, and they're lifting me up in the air. And I still remember that after my guitar performance, and it was 2018. They lifted me up in the air, and if you watch the video, you can see my mouth saying, "Don't kill me, don't." I was so afraid because I'm so big, I was afraid they're going to drop me. So anyway, I'm glad you're here. I hope everything's going good where you are. Summer's still not really here in San Diego. It's gotten warmer, but because of the jet stream or whatever, we're still experiencing very low temperatures for this time of year. So while the rest of the country is pretty much in a drastic heat wave. So everybody be safe out there, drink a lot of water. So today I have Safia Abdalla from the ASP.NET team. I'm really excited to have her on the show. Not only is it her first time, but she's going to be telling us about all the cool stuff coming out in ASP.NET 8, which I really want to know because I kind of out of touch with at least the front end stuff in ASP.NET. So I'm really interested in that. So this is show 83. And let's get going. I had a brain fart already. Hey, guess what happened this week? I got my 17th Microsoft MVP award. I'm really excited about that. I'm really proud to still be in the program and still hopefully making a difference and helping developers out with my writing and my books and this show. This show is for you. So make sure you ask questions of Safia. Start putting them in now for ASP.NET 8, and we'll get those answered for you as fast as we can. So here's to another year of the MVP, being a Microsoft MVP. I'm looking forward to the next MVP summit, which I'm definitely going to go to because I miss all my MVP friends. And so anyway, that was that kind of made my week, and something else made my week too. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll tell you that in a second. Also, if you live somewhere near Denmark, I hope you'll come see me. It's the only time I'm going to be speaking in person so far this year, and that's going to be I'll be speaking August 30th in Copenhagen, Denmark, at the brand new Copenhagen Developers Festival. So I'm really excited, and I'm really excited because I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but there's definitely going to be music, and I'm hopefully going to be playing. I know my friend who was on the show a couple episodes, Carl Franklin, will be playing, and so I'm really looking forward to hanging out with Carl and Mads Torgersen and everybody, all the other awesome speakers. And so if you're in that area, I hope you come to this very first conference. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. So the other good thing that happened this week is my brand new book is on Amazon as of this morning or yesterday, I think. And it's my 6th edition of Rock Your Career, Surviving the Technical Interview. I've been working really hard on this book for the last couple of months since I'm still looking for a contract and I need something to do. And so I decided to update this book, and it's got, I forgot to do a final page count before the show, but I think it's got close to 60 new pages in it. So if you have an old copy, there's definitely not a lot of new information in here in this one, including how to leverage AI and also new questions you can ask or new questions you might be asked during the interview. So I worked really, really hard on this, and so I hope you go pick up a copy. All right. I have a brand new article out on CSharpCorner. It's the second part in a 3-part series. It's called Real World Coding Issues, and this one focuses on style and performance issues. It's pretty dang long, so I hope you read it all, because these are common issues I see people doing over and over again at literally every contract I work on. in the last 12 years. So I'm already done part 3, which will come out next month. And so I hope you're getting something from this series. It's really important for me to kind of share these things I see developers do it over and over, so you don't do them, so you produce the best quality code with the best performance when you write your code. So I hope you go check it out on CSharpCorner. I decided to see what's going on in .NET land, and it looks like this week Satya is saying that he's betting everything on AI, and I kind of like that quote, because I think most companies, if they're not already looking at AI, they're already behind. And to give you an example, my last company they basically had a program that really needs AI, and they're using the old school AI, which is not really AI. And I asked them towards the end of my contract, "Are you looking at AI?" And they're not. And I was thinking, you're already losing at this point if you're not looking at it. So if you work at a company that specially analyzes data, things like that, you really need to be looking at AI. And of course, Microsoft has got a lot of great offerings in that. So I hope you check it out. All right, I'd like to welcome Satya onto the show. Satya is a software engineer on the ASP.NET Core team and a longtime member of the open source community. Prior to working on .NET, she was involved with the Jupyter Notebook open source community. I don't know if I pronounced that right. When she's not at her computer, she can be found at the gym, on the road running, or on the mountains hiking. I don't know why I was brain farting on that. Welcome, Safia.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. And no worries on the brain fart. I think there was a little bit of like alliteration going on in that intro sentence.
I screw up most all bios. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's I guess I don't like reading online. I mean, reading live in front of people. Maybe that's my imposter syndrome's kicking in. I don't know.
Doing some of these podcasts, it gives you a stronger appreciation for newscasters with the teleprompter that's scrolling by super fast, and somehow they could still kind of keep up and do.
I really wish we had something that was like that. I know some people have been trying to do something like that. I've seen things here and there, but for like, I've wanted that in PowerPoint for like ever, because that's what PowerPoint needs, especially when we do online presentations, is to have that kind of teleprompter thing, right? Yeah. And they can easily do it. And kind of the dream that I had, back when I was thinking about this, and even Magnus, who speaks at the CSharpCorner conference, him and I talked about this. One thing I'd like to see is like, so when I present, I'd never like live, like I was watching one of your live sessions this morning. And when I present live, I never stand at the podium. I'm always walking around, right?
Yeah.
Because my whole thing is automated. So all I need is something to hook up to my phone with buttons to go next and back or whatever, and the teleprompter stuff. So when I present, I want them to see one thing, but on the phone, I want to see my thing, right? When I
you're a little
around.
Remote control command center.
Right. And why PowerPoint? I've given up on Office products a long time ago, but why they're not like doing something like this boggles my mind.
Yeah, I was going to confess that in the past, I've been a fan of the remote control option for Apple Keynote, actually, when you've got your iPhone out. And I've done a couple of presentations on Keynote where I've been able to do remote control. But yeah, all that kind of orchestration that happens for you to bring a presentation live, it takes a while to kind of figure out what works for you and what doesn't, and et cetera.
Yeah. And because, sorry, I'm picking on PowerPoint. I hope they listen to this. Luckily, I'm not a PowerPoint MVP, but they probably kick me out. But so a long time ago, because, because I do walk around and I can't look at the notes on the PowerPoint deck and things like that. I started printing, these 4x6 cards
Mm-hmm.
with all my notes on it, right? So every session I would show up with a stack of cards, right? And those would be like my teleprompter thing if I needed it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing I wish PowerPoint would have to make things easier on us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
and especially, for example, when I'm presenting right now, I have to present in a window so I can, show it through StreamYard, but I
Yes.
can't see the notes when you do that,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah, you need like a multi monitor setup to get just the effective thing going with your notes, your presentation, and maybe whatever third thing you want on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's stop talking about PowerPoint.
Yeah. We don't need to talk about it, in fact, because most of what I'm going to talk through today is actually going to be in code. So I won't be touching PowerPoint at all.
Yeah. So before we get going, everybody out there, if you're watching, please post your questions now for Safia so we can get those answered. And so what do you want to show us first?
Yeah. Dave, when I was thinking about how I kind of wanted this podcast to go and what I wanted to share, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's coming new in .NET 8. But to be honest, we do so many of those presentations. We do it at the MVP Summit. We do it at Build. We have the blog post that we ship out pretty much every month for each of the .NET 8 previews that come out. And, I feel like at some point people will learn what's new in .NET 8, but what I thought would be interesting was to talk a little bit about the process that it takes to get there. Given that I'm kind of one of the people who's involved in shipping out some of those things. So it's like, it would be really interesting if Dave and I kind of had a conversation with some code samples about how the product evolves from, we ship .NET 7 out the door, .NET Conf is over, we turn our eyes to .NET 8 and we think about, all right, what are we going to ship next November? Before we jumped on this live session, we were kind of talking about, I've been on the .NET team for about 4 releases now. I joined and was involved in .NET 5, and so 6, 7, and now 8. And what I really like is that there's a particular cadence to the way that we ship .NET releases, at least since I've joined the team. Always ship a GA release in November. And then for people who are kind of super involved in .NET releases, MVPs like yourself, a couple of like really highly engaged users, we ship out these previews that come out every month, and it starts in February. And it goes all the way up until, August. Is previews, and then we ship out our release candidates, and then we ship out general availability. And I kind of wanted to structure like the story I was going to share around what happens going up to each one of these previews.
Sure.
And how sometimes, some previews are spent kind of designing and thinking about what you're going to ship in the next preview. And some previews, you have a lot to share and you're like looking eagerly for feedback, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of me explaining the outline to what I'm going to talk about. So I'm hopefully carrying people along. The other thing is I am on the ASP.NET team. The things that I'm going to share are kind of stuff that I've touched. One of the wild things about working in .NET is that there is a lot going on at any given time in a release. You've got the stuff that's going on in the runtime. You've got the stuff that the ASP.NET team is doing. You've got the stuff that, Visual Studio is doing with tooling integrations. You've got the stuff that's happening in the C# language and in the compiler. So it's a lot. Heck, it's a lot for me to keep up with sometimes of everything that we're shipping at once. So this is just kind of a very narrow microcosm of some of the things that are coming in .NET 8. Obviously, there are some things that are happening in the runtime and in the compiler that I won't touch on.
Well, that's
scope.
That's what you're saying is really interesting because I don't think most of us really know what happens behind closed doors on Microsoft, right? I mean, we know when releases come out, we know when the previews come out, but other than that, we don't really know, what's actually going on. I can tell when you guys are quiet because you stop answering my emails for a certain amount of time. And then you start answering them. So I know something's happening, that you guys are like hunkered down trying to figure out what's coming out in the next version. So, so I can only guess what's happening at Microsoft. So we don't really know these things. So
well,
any insight to that is be, awesome to share.
And, at least for me, kind of doing some of the engineering on this work, a lot of the stuff happens in open source. So for example, like hot off the presses, I'm doing some work right now. And I've put up a draft PR. It's totally in progress. I'm implementing this new feature in real time. I'm pushing commits out, and anyone can see it. It's kind of a scary thing that people can see my in progress work. One of the aspects of the way that we approach design on the .NET team, or specifically the ASP.NET team, is we have API review. So anytime we want to add a new API to the framework, we have to draft a proposal that kind of outlines the shape of the API, the motivation, alternative designs that we considered, and then kind of how do we expect people to use it. And those happen on GitHub too. So, for this thing I'm working on, I put out an API review that we did as a team on Thursday, but the notes go out on GitHub, and we can actually like ping people in the community for, hey, did we design this API right? Like if we avoid adding this extension method, would it be harder to use? Would you be okay rolling your own? How does it feel? Are the decisions we're making right? And I think as a contributor on the platform or the framework, I think it's really important because I have not spent much of my career building services. You mentioned in my intro that prior to working on .NET, most of my kind of like technical involvement was in a project called Project Jupyter, which is kind of also developer tool type thing. So it's really valuable getting that feedback from people who do work on services about what it's like to build web apps, what kind of APIs they want to be able to use, how things compose in larger scale applications. So I love that about being open source, is that we can put out draft PRs, we can share our API review notes and ask for feedback. It does mean that people kind of have to be on GitHub and be on the repo and following it and stuff like that. But we put in a fair amount of effort to make it at least really easy to engage with some of the engineering effort that we're doing.
Yeah, well, you gave me a really good idea, because what you just explained, I think is awesome. I think it's awesome you guys are doing it. That's the right way, right? Because I remember multiple times I've been at Microsoft for the MVP Summit, and you guys have shown us something, and I'm not going to tell stories about it because I've got some pretty good ones, but you showed us something, and we all collectively said no. And that's actually what happened with the first version of the Azure SQL database. The first thing they showed us, we all unanimously said no. And literally the next week Microsoft shut it down, and then and then figured out the right way to do it, and then that's what became Azure SQL, right? So
And you've highlighted what I think is a really important quality to getting feedback in this very open nature, particularly in open source, is when people say, no, this won't work for me. I think as a framework engineer, you sometimes have to put a little bit of the ego and the perspective aside, and really kind of build some empathy and think, okay, maybe I think this is the right way to build this feature based on my experience, but I'm hearing this feedback that, it might not be the way to go. So how can I readjust? So I think approaching that kind of constructive feedback with a certain humility and like you actually go and correct course is important too, because you don't want to just ignore the feedback you're getting.
Right.
That discourages people from giving it.
Yeah. And I just made a note because I'm going to bug the people in the MVP program. But, when you guys are, doing these kind of things on GitHub and wanting feedback, we should know about it. They should be sending us emails telling us, okay, you're in the developer technologies, so here's some, things you might be interested in looking at. I'm going to ask them to do that because there's, like you said, there's so much going on. It's hard for anybody to keep up pretty much. And so if that was more in our face, we could contribute more to, the future of what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah. And I fully recognize that we do a lot of our work on GitHub. That's where the source code lives. That's where issue tracking lives, et cetera, et cetera. But not everybody is on GitHub. So to assume that people who are on there are going to be able to see everything isn't necessarily fair.
Well, they should be on GitHub. That's what.
Yeah. For the parties.
It's like, the social media thing. You gotta have a login to GitHub. Sorry.
I do agree with that message as a long time open source enthusiast. But yes, I brought up some things. There's the API review, feedback from the community, particularly in interactions on like GitHub and GitHub issues and pull requests is really important. And the way the cycle tends to begin is, we ship .NET 7 in November. We're starting to kind of think about the next release. There's already been some big picture thinking of like, all right, these are the things that we're going to want to tackle. I know for me as an individual contributor, right around that time frame is when I start thinking about like, what bugs do I want to fix? What are those little paper cuts that I haven't had the chance to work on that, now that we've just shipped a release, .NET usually ships in November. So you've got that quiet period in November, December, where it's the holidays for people in certain areas. Everything's kind of relaxed. So it's a great opportunity to be productive. And my secret tip to people is that if you, first of all, I encourage people to try out the previews that we ship as often as possible. But my favorite preview to try out is the preview one that typically ships kind of in February. Why? Because you are going to get all of the bug fixes from the engineers who are a little bored in that November, December timeframe, like myself. And you're also going to get those bigger features that didn't make the cut line for the previous release. They'll usually land in that preview one. So I think another great way for the kind of community to engage with the development of the product is to try out those previews. I know it's a little hard to do because it's not an official supported release. And it does take time to upgrade, but I would say if you've got a project that's targeting like .NET 7 or .NET 6, it should be hopefully easy to upgrade to .NET 8. And then just see, hey, does it still build? Did we break something in your project? And report those issues. So I think those are great ways to engage with it. And so certainly this time around preview 1 was a lot of small bug fixes that we got immediately after we shipped .NET 7 for GA. We get bug reports on GitHub, fix them right away. Those are always really validating to get those bug fixes because it means that people are actually using your software. So I like to fix the bugs. One of the interesting features that came out for .NET 8 Preview 1 is support for route tooling. In Visual Studio, and a collection of route-based analyzers that you can access in kind of whatever editor you're using that supports Roslyn analyzers. So this is going to be fantastic for all of you folks who are building web apps and kind of care about all of the routes in your application. So, all right, you can see my screen here. Cool. All right. So one of the things that I wanted to call out is that typically in your web application, you would have a collection of routes, and then there's some sort of like business logic or code behind that's associated with these routes. So I've got these 2 routes here. And one of the things that we shipped in .NET 8 was route tooling. So you get improved syntax highlighting for your routes. So you can disambiguate here between what's in the route is just part of the path, like hello or age, and then what's actually a parameter that can go into your business logic or your code, like name or age, and the constraints are identified as well. And you get some analyzers to help you as you're constructing your routes in your application logic. So for example, I've got this endpoint here. There is a route parameter called age. It's got an integer constraint on it. And I've got my handler, which contains my business logic, also takes an integer. But one of the things you'll notice is that there is a difference in nullability between the annotations on the function, which expects the age to be nullable, and the annotations on the constraint in the route, which does not expect it to be nullable. So if things are working, hopefully, we should be able to get, oh gosh, this is the pain of like live demos. We should be able to get a syntax forwarding.
It's not a good demo unless it fails, right?
Yeah, it's not. But you should generally see a analyzer warning trigger, and in fact, you'll see one of the other analyzers that we shipped in dotNetDave trigger that kind of prompts you, hey, your route constraints are mismatched. And I think it might actually be the other way around. Let me try it.
I didn't know you could in the I wasn't aware in the handler you could just send something back like a string like that.
Yes. Yeah. So this is the new minimal APIs that we shipped in .NET 6. And it allows you to pass the kind of thing that makes it minimal is that we accept any delegate reference for your route handler or your kind of core business logic handler. And there's some cool logic that happens in the framework that takes that handler, which implements some arbitrary signature. For example, it takes an integer and it returns a string. It takes some kind of POCO, like a to-do or a user, and it returns some other complex type. We've got some cool logic behind the scene that maps it to a request delegate type that plugs into the rest of the routing infrastructure in ASP.NET Core.
That's cool.
But yes, analyzers in .NET 8 that we shipped as part of route tooling, coming in with that syntax highlighting support. One of the other things I wanted to highlight, we were kind of talking about community engagement and how other folks in the community can be engaged with the project. We accept community contributions for things all of the time. If you go on the repo, there is a collection of issues that are tagged help wanted in the repository that folks can access. One of the contributions that we got that shipped for .NET 8 was an analyzer contribution made by David McCarter that warns you if you are using or modifying the header object on a request incorrectly. So this is actually the analyzer that worked here. You'll observe that I'm getting a warning on line 9 because I am using the add method to set the header value for the accept header on my request. This is not generally advised. It's explained
not on the
here.
Request. Yeah.
Yeah, it's explained here in the analyzer message. You're going to get an argument exception around duplicate keys if the accept header is already been configured. And so this analyzer will warn you and recommend alternatives that you can code fix for this pattern. And again, this was a community contribution. We had this one and a couple of other ones that rolled out in .NET 7. So or .NET 8 preview 1. So I think it's really cool to kind of be part of a project where it's not just a single collective of people who are building it, but we kind of open the door to other people in the community to contribute by virtue of now being open source.
So since you are so open source now, and you're probably a really good person to ask, is because before you guys went open source, the main feedback you got were from either MVPs or somebody in your I forget what they call it now, the top 100 companies, or no, I forget what you guys. No, not the the partners, Microsoft partners, and but now you get it from anybody in the world, right? So just how do you probably get a mountain of stuff. You can only do so much. So how do you decide, or how do you go through that much, and then how do you decide to pick what you pick?
Oh gosh, that is a great question, David. That is one where I actually think sometimes I could be a little bit better about it. So as an individual contributor, I'll say that most of the active user feedback comes from two places, issues that are filed on GitHub. And then sometimes we will get issues that are ASP.NET related that come via the report feedback tool in Visual Studio. Someone will be in Visual Studio working on an ASP.NET thing. Hey, there's something behaving weirdly, and they'll file an issue there. And so those are kind of at a low level, the kind of feedback points for for myself as an engineer. There's other feedback points too, like people are talking to product managers, people are giving their feedback on surveys. But I think the one that I think is like hot and live all the time is this kind of flow of issues that is coming on GitHub.
Yeah.
And we do have a triage process. The way it currently works is that depending on someone's ownership on the team, they're responsible for triaging a certain area within the product. For example, I showcased minimal APIs, which is kind of that map get invocation style for registering route handlers on your application. That's an area that I own. So any bug reports that come through that, I will triage. And that involves, reading the bug report, figuring out, hey, is there merit or do we need more information? And then once you've established that this is actually a bug, there's this kind of calculus I go through of like, is this small enough that I can just fix it now? And like, it's like, it'll take me an hour to fix, get it over with, and it'll make somebody's day better. Some of the ones that are a little bit heavier, we kind of wait to get a little bit more signal about how many people are impacted by it. One of the things that we keep a focus on, and we actually mentioned this in our GitHub repo, is upvotes on issues are important to us as an indicator for figuring out, hey, people really call about, and so we can go in, we can sort issues by most number of upvotes or reactions, and that's a good signal that like it's not just one or two people who are impacted by this, it's like 50 or 100. I mean, that's kind of a good proxy for managing that. And I gotta say, sometimes some of these issues are just like us needing to do a better job of documenting things or explaining how things plug in together. And so there's a fair amount of feedback that I'll be able to resolve just by saying, hey, it looks like you want to do this. Here's a code sample that you can start off with to solve this problem. And people are usually happy and go about their way. So yeah, the buckets of things are usually either legitimate bug, easy to fix, just, go out, fix it. Feedback that is kind of people have questions about how to do things the right way, and we can kind of steer them in the right direction. And then there's a considerable chunk that's like, okay, this is a bigger feature. We're going to have to think about prioritization and all of that stuff. And that's kind of the thing that we funnel through into planning and prioritization at later stages. But on a daily basis, you'll find me a couple of hours a week just on GitHub, looking through issues, either asking people for better repros, or someone reports a bug. I'm like, okay, here's where the problem is. I don't have time to fix it, but you can. So that's another thing I'll do sometimes, just to get people kind of engaged in the open source part of it. But yeah, and we talked about humility and accepting constructive feedback. I think another thing about managing feedback in an open source project is like you get a large volume of it, so you have to be prepared to efficiently manage it. And that's always a challenge.
I'm sure it is. And but when you were talking about that, I was thinking about something I've said many times live, and that is the Microsoft developers kind of maybe more so in the past have been kind of out of touch with the real world because you guys live in your own little Microsoft bubble, right? So and that's why for many years I've been saying like everybody on your team should be out speaking or something, so they get in front of real people, right? So but now with that, you have GitHub and the feedback, and you also have the feedback mechanism through Visual Studio. I'm sure that helps you to stay in the real world and understand what people are really struggling with.
Yeah, I agree. I think the GitHub issues help. I will say I find a lot of value in like going to conferences like Build and the MVP Summit, because there is a certain amount of perspective that you don't capture in a GitHub issue that's written up, that you can get a better sense of when you're actually talking to another engineer. Someone might file a GitHub issue that is actually like a symptom of a larger problem of the way that they're thinking of how the framework should be used, or general struggle that they're having. And so you kind of can unravel that little kernel and recognize that, hey, there's actually like a fundamental design issue that we haven't considered here, that this single GitHub issue is kind of like a red herring for. But yes, that's certainly an aspect to it.
Yeah, and that's Oh, I wanted to tell everyone out there, those of you who might be hesitant of submitting something to Microsoft, either a bug or a feature idea, don't be, right? Because if you don't say something, it's never going to happen, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, they want to hear from you. And number three, they actually respond and they actually fix things. I mean, I always have something in the pipeline of you guys fixing because I'm always finding stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I submit every major thing I find. If I first try to exhaust, looking it up and seeing, if there is a fix or if someone else has found it. And if I can't, then I definitely submit an issue to it. And sometimes you guys fix things pretty dang fast. Like one time I submitted something about I think it was a Visual Studio installer, and I swear the next day or whatever, there was a fix.
Yeah.
I was going,
it's one
what?
of those like, oh, it'll take me an hour to fix
Yeah.
it. Might as well
It's like
do
you
it.
said, the hour, right? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just fix it.
Yeah, and I think that's so awesome hearing your perspective on that, because it's like, to me, it's very validating that, an hour of my time can really have a positive impact on somebody else's experience. And it, an hour in the grand scheme of things is nothing. And definitely a +1 to giving feedback, because I mentioned earlier, preview 1 for me at least is always about lots of bug fixes. And getting bug reports is validating to me because it means that people are using my code. When I don't get bug fixes or bug reports, I get a little bit anxious because I'm like, I know the software is not perfect, so maybe it's just people aren't using it, or it hasn't been exercised in enough novel ways. But yeah. But preview 1 and the bug fixes and the kind of like some of the major things that we that get into preview 1 in that lull, the November, December lull that don't make it. It's kind of like not the end of what we ship. One of the big themes that we focused on for .NET 8 was support for native AOT throughout some parts of the framework. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the kind of like status quo or the current approach for .NET is that when you compile your application, it gets compiled to an intermediary language, what's called IL, and then it's compiled just in time by the runtime when your code is running down into machine code. Now, this has a couple of pros, but it does have a few cons that impact things like application startup time. So, the compilation needs to happen when your app starts. If we can figure out a way to get rid of that, well, we can reduce startup time for applications, which ends up having really meaningful value for applications that are deployed in the cloud as services. Like app startup time converts to dollars and cents in that world, and kind of memory usage converts to dollars and cents. So those kinds of like performance ramifications and consequences can have like legitimate impact.
They can.
Yes. And so one of the big areas of focus was making .NET, specifically minimal APIs, kind of the thing that I'm going to focus on, AOT friendly for .NET 8. AOT refers to ahead of time compilation. And the idea is that, instead of doing that compilation just in time, at runtime, you do it at ahead of time at build time down to the machine code, not that intermediary language.
Using NGen, right?
Yeah. And so this has a couple of, ramifications. The first being like your startup time is greatly reduced because you take away that compilation cost. But it does present some challenges to us because native AOT is AOT is kind of married to another concept in, I guess, the language of compiling code, which is the notion of like trimming or code shaking or tree shaking. The idea is that, you have an application that's referencing all sorts of different types, members on those types, et cetera, et cetera. But on a given type, you might not need all the members. On a given namespace, you might not need all the members. So can you trim out or shake out only the types that you need, that your application directly references, so that you can have a smaller application size all up? And one of the challenges with making applications trim friendly is that A lot of the code that you write has to be kind of statically analyzable. So we need to be able to see at build time, okay, you're referencing this type, you're using these members, yada, yada. It's pretty easy to sort out what you need and what you don't.
Right.
But Lord knows we don't make things that hard for ourselves, because reflection is a pretty powerful and popular tool in .NET, and reflection makes it very difficult to statically analyze what actual members are used, because all of that is kind of resolved dynamically.
Right.
In ASP.NET, we do have dynamic code gen, so we do generate code at startup for certain applications, and that's not particularly trim friendly because we're accessing types and generating kind of new code that didn't exist before.
Right.
And so this kind of challenge came up to us about how do we make ASP.NET and particularly minimal APIs trim friendly to support this native AOT effort for .NET.
Yeah.
And that's actually what I spent most of my time working on for .NET 8, and I kind of want to show some of what's that. First, though, I want to do a time check. Are we good to start diving into this?
We have about 42, about 12 minutes left, I guess, because I got a couple slides at the end. But yeah, about 12 minutes, I would say.
All right, I will do my best. Thanks for being accommodating with all of the dead stuff I have.
Simon says 8 to 12 minutes.
Okay, 8 to 12 minutes. All right, I think we can make it happen. So one of the, I guess, things that I wanted to drive home is that Preview 3 comes out. Preview 2 was a bit quiet because we were kind of in the background working on some of this stuff, which tends to happen. There's like a seasonality to these previews. But Preview 3 came out, and I believe Preview 3 came out, I want to say, in April. And this is kind of like the first preview where we kind of showcase some of the work that we were doing to have these AOT compatible APIs in .NET 8. So one of the things that I've highlighted here is that there is a new template in .NET 8. You might have been familiar with .NET New Web, .NET New MVC, Web App, et cetera, et cetera. In .NET 8, you can now call .NET New API. And it's an API-based template. And what's even more interesting is that you can pass this flag to it, --AOT. And what it'll do is it'll configure some stuff behind the scenes to make it so that your application is enabled for trimming and ahead of time compilation. So it'll do things like set your publish AOT build flag. It will change some of the invocations that are happening in your code. So one of the things I want to draw your attention to in line 5 is we're calling this method create slim builder, which is kind of unusual verbiage. What's that slim adjective, I guess, is the
like a diet plan.
You know? Yeah, you've actually got it. You've actually called it out rather well. So by the default, the builder that you would construct or you would get if you called create builder comes in with a lot of stuff under the kitchen sink. Things like support for HTTPS. It comes with support for all sorts of different loggers. And not all of those implementations are inherently trim friendly. So create slim builder is kind of the analog to that. It's slim because it's configured with less things under the hood. It's kind of the bare minimum set of default middlewares and services that you would need to get started with a web application. So that's one difference you'll see if you pass that AOT flag or you don't, is are we going to be calling create builder, which has got more under the kitchen sink and is not inherently trim friendly, or are you going to be invoking create slim builder, which is got much less going on under the sink and is trim friendly. And coming up in preview 7, there's actually a PR out for this now. So this is kind of hot off the presses. There's also create empty builder, which is you don't want anything under the kitchen sink, and you kind of want full fidelity and control over what kinds of things are configured on your host. And so there's kind of this gradient that we target where create builder, you're not particularly keen or concerned about trimming at the moment. You just want a full, robust set of defaults. Create Slim Builder is kind of that in between where you do care about trimming. And you don't totally care about everything under the kitchen sink, but it gives you kind of like some degree of control to modify things. And then Create Empty Builder is like you want all the power and control. So there's kind of like different user personas and how people will interact with these APIs depending on how much thinking they want to do about what's going on when they construct their host.
So if you choose Create Slim Builder or Create Empty Builder, can you add anything that's in Create Builder?
Yes, you can configure those
manually
later on yourselves. Yes.
Okay.
You will just kind of have to figure out what it is that you want to add, and then go do that yourself. Cool.
Good.
So that's one change. The other change that you will see here is that there's some nonsense about JSON serializer context. What is going on there? So one of the things that didn't ship in .NET 8, actually, I believe it might have shipped in
7.
.NET 7. Yes, the JSON
serializer. That was in 7, I think. Yeah.
Yes, the JSON. So this JSON source generator is something that's used in this effort, but it's not net new in .NET 8. JSON falls into the fun category of things that we love that are like serializers and deserializers, which inherently are very like reflection heavy. You want to be able to reflect on what type of the type that you are trying to deserialize or serialize from, examine its members, figure out what attributes are on them that might impact the way the serialization or deserialization happens. So it's inherently, building serializers is inherently not very trim friendly by default. And one of the things that we can do is actually use source generators to support like the serialization and deserialization effort. So the template comes with JSON source generators configured by default. If you're not familiar, JSON source generators require that you kind of implement this partial class, which the source generator will decorate at build time or add to at build time with particular logic for its functionality. And then you have to kind of attribute that class with all of the types in your application that need to be marked as serializable so that the JSON source generator can discover them. So, that's the third kind of component to this.
Just to pause you real quick is I've already written an article about this attribute, the JSON serializable attribute on CSharpCorner. And I also show, in the article, because I benchmark freaking everything these days because of my code performance book, is I show the speed differences, and there is, a dramatic speed difference between the two. Yeah.
I don't know if I highlighted that clearly enough, but one of the benefits that you do get with these approaches is like a considerable amount of like runtime perf. So we have benchmarks that showcase that, with these source generators turned on or native AOT turned on, like the amount of requests per second that your service can handle just like increases dramatically. And those benchmarks are also open and available for people to check out. So another kind of thing to share there is that the same benchmarks that we use to measure how our software or how our code changes are doing is totally accessible by everyone in the public to like check out yourself.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. Great. So we've kind of talked about the changes that have been made to the builder to make it more native AOT friendly. We've talked about JSON source generation, the kind of challenges of building serializers that are inherently not trim friendly, and how source generators can help with that. There's still a big chunk of code in this sample that I haven't talked about. And I almost feel like we might be overdue for a part 2.
I was just thinking we need a part 2 on this because you're showing so much great stuff that, we're going to have you back on soon.
I'm definitely happy to be a part 2 because, we're only at preview 3 and really we're at kind of like preview 2, preview 1, what was happening around that timeline and in the kind of history of this release. But the next thing that I want to kind of discuss is minimal APIs itself. So if you're not familiar, minimal APIs essentially refers to the pattern of passing in or registering endpoints using these map action invocations. So if you ever see code and they've got map gets and map posts all over the place, with a route and then a user handler. And the user handler typically implements some sort of like arbitrary signature, like we were talking about earlier. Takes an integer, returns a string, takes an integer, returns some sort of complex type. Under the hood, the framework is using reflection and dynamic code gen to take that user's route handler, figure out what kinds of parameters it's expecting. Is it expecting integers? Is it expecting a complex type? And then figure out how to resolve those parameters from the HTTP request and kind of do the binding itself and then generate code that does that binding and calls the handler that was passed by the user. It's basically kind of like a serializer from the HTTP context. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, inherently not trim friendly. So this was kind of like the second challenge or problem that we needed to solve as part of this effort. And source generation was the strategy that we used to do that. Source generation is really powerful for a lot of the stuff that you would do with dynamic code analysis at runtime. You can do it statically now. And so one of the big things that we shipped for preview 3 was a source generator based approach for generating that kind of binding logic and that serialization logic for these minimal APIs in .NET 8. Now I can get to it, or I can pause here and we can.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time. Yeah, I think we got to do that on part 2. But I do have a quick question really quick while you're showing the mapkit, because I haven't used minimal APIs yet.
Sure.
And that is, for example, you're pointing, like on line 17, you're pointing that to a method called sample to-dos, right?
That is actually a variable sample to do. So it's going to return, but you could also pass a method reference, and that would work as well.
So my question is, the method that you're passing to, does it also have to have, you know, like kind of the typical attributes you put on top of an API call? You know what I'm saying? Well, you're doing a mapkit, so I guess you don't have to do that. But
yeah, you don't have to. So
and you're setting the route, so you don't have to do that. But how about you know, some of the serialization issue, you know, things, or you could also, I think you can also do things like say what exceptions will be thrown from this.
Yeah,
maybe I'm remembering wrong. Yeah.
So some of the attributes that you mentioned, like you don't need to put in a route property or a route attribute the same way that you would in MVC. There are some attributes that are supported. So MVC has the concept of like a produces attribute where you can document what kind of response type your endpoint will return. That's supported here. Some other things are not required. So MVC has a set of attributes like from form or from services from route that allow you to indicate what exactly a parameter should bind from. That is not totally necessary. Minimal APIs has some inference rules that it'll use to automatically figure out where it should bind from. So they're optional, not required. But yeah, certainly some of the other things, like you don't, for example, there's no like controller attribute here. There's no like get method attribute here. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I guess I got to learn more about minimal APIs.
Yeah, maybe in your next blog post.
Well, I've got to start letting you go, unfortunately. I wish we could talk longer, but so, you know, it's really late in India and Simon's got to go to bed. But
oh yeah, that's totally my fault. I tend to
always blame it on Simon. He doesn't like it, but
oh no, this one I will take the blame for. I love talking about this stuff, and I feel like I could probably spend like 5 hours just chatting.
Yeah. So this has been really informative to me. I've gotten some comments. I'm sure I'll get more as you know the week goes on and people watch this watch this recorded. But this has been a fascinating episode for me, and it's been great. You're very knowledgeable, and it's been really refreshing. It's been refreshing to learn kind of what's happening behind the scenes in the ASP.NET when you guys are doing these things. So.
Absolutely.
I'm really glad you shared this with us. But I have 2 questions I ask everybody at the end. I'll ask you, and I think I might know what your answer to the first one is, and
Yeah.
that's, what do you do for fun?
Oh yeah, you definitely know the answer. I'm an active person. I love going to the gym, love going out and hiking, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. It's gorgeous here. And I do a lot of running.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you live in Seattle, so I guess you
Yeah.
do. What brings you happiness in your tech career besides income, if that's even one?
Indulging my curiosity, my creative side, and getting to sit and talk to someone for a little bit of an hour about things I love and find interesting. I think it's just so fun.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. And that was one point I wanted to make up talk about really quick, is you were talking about, you learn by networking, and my book that I just promoted at the beginning of the show, my new tech interview book. I don't know how many times in that book I mentioned networking, right?
Yeah.
Because I learned the most by networking, right? Not in sessions, not even in user group meetings. I learned the best by networking and talking to people. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. It's the people behind the software, but
yeah, exactly. So I can't wait to have you back on the show again.
Yes, absolutely. That'll be fun.
Thanks so much. You can hang out and talk afterwards if you want. And what else I was going to say? Oh, have a great rest of the weekend.
Awesome. Thank you, David. You too.
Thank you. Well, that was a really awesome session. I really liked it. I really like listening to these kind of, really informative things from within the teams that, we all work with, every day in our coding life. So I can't wait to have her back on. She's been a great guest. Oh, here's some geek humor for today. So someone posted this old computer, and it's old because it only has 15 gigabytes of hard disk space. But it says right up there on top, never obsolete. Yeah, I think it is. I don't know what brilliant marketing person came up with that one. All right, as usual, please help me help the kids from the slums in Delhi, India. I raise money for the kids, and there's the pictures of when I was there back last October when I was speaking at the CSharpCorner conference. There's the two founders there, Dave and Chandy, who are awesome human beings to help get these kids out of the slums, because the slums in India are pretty terrible, and I've gone through them a couple times now, and so please help me help those kids by going to the Voice of Slum or going to my GoFundMe page and donating whatever you can. You can donate money, you can buy school supplies for the kids, you can buy clothing for the kids. So please, we have the ability to give back, and I hope that you will give something to the Voice of Slum, because I'll be really thankful. As usual, we have to think about our friends in the Ukraine. Hopefully things will be over soon, but they're unfortunately still having to deal with this. I've been getting a lot of hits from the Ukraine on my website, so I'm hoping that's a good sign. But because I really want to go back. I was there in 2015, as I keep telling you, and I've always wanted to go back, and so I want to go back before I retire this career. So let's get it over. All right, so next week I have Fahid Faramandian, if I pronounce it correctly. We're going to be talking about, I think, Azure DevOps, and so if you're interested in all that, please come back next week. Also, help your fellow human by donating blood. There's me when I got 10 gallons. I'm over 16 gallons now. And I just found out this week that here in San Diego, the San Diego Blood Bank had a fire in their main building, and they lost a lot of blood. And so they're really in a need for blood right now. So if you live in San Diego area, please go donate blood at San Diego Blood Bank right now, because your fellow citizens need it, because some of it was burnt up. So, and if you donate this week, I tweeted about this yesterday. If you donate this weekend and post proof to my tweet, I will send you one of my books, as long as you have a United States address, because it's just too costly to ship outside of the United States. So please go donate. And with that, I thanks everybody for watching. I had a great time on this show. And if you have any suggestions, comments, who you want me to invite on the show, whatever, just email me at rockinthecodeworld@csharpcorner.com. And with that, I'll see you next time.